A web designer completes a $22,000 project. The client accepts the site, goes live, generates revenue, and then refuses to pay the final invoice, claiming the work doesn't match the original vision. The designer has email threads, Slack messages, and a Google Doc full of scope notes. None of it is a contract. There is no clear deliverable definition, no payment terms, no dispute resolution clause. She hires an attorney for $4,500 to collect $22,000 and eventually settles for $14,000 to avoid trial. A $200 contract template would have prevented every dollar of that loss. A contract is a legally enforceable agreement. To be enforceable, it must contain 4 elements: an offer, acceptance, consideration, meaning something of value exchanged by both parties, and mutual intent to be bound. An email chain where you propose a project and the client says, "Sounds great, let's do it," may technically meet these elements, but it rarely specifies what was agreed with enough precision to be useful in a dispute. The purpose of a written contract is not to reflect your good faith understanding of the project. It is to document the agreement with enough specificity that a neutral third party could interpret it correctly without talking to either of you. The scope of work is the most important provision in a freelance contract and the most commonly underwritten. A scope of work should define what you will deliver, what format it will be in, how many revision rounds are included, what constitutes a revision versus a new request, what the client is responsible for providing to you, and by when, and what happens when the client's delays push your timeline. Without explicit revision limits, 1 round of revisions becomes 12. Without a client deliverables section, a project can stall for 6 months while you wait for content and then be blamed for the delay. Payment terms define when you invoice, when the client must pay, what the late fee is, and what happens if payment is not received. For project work, the standard structure is 50% upfront, 50% upon completion. For longer projects, milestone billing, 33% at start, 33% at midpoint, 33% at delivery, reduces your exposure. Include a late fee provision. 1.5% per month on unpaid balances is common and enforceable in most states. More importantly, include a suspension clause. If payment is not received within 15 days of the due date, work stops until the balance is settled. This clause is the most effective collection tool available. Intellectual property ownership must be explicitly addressed in your contract, and the default legal position may not be what either party assumes. Under U.S. copyright law, the creator owns the work unless it qualifies as a work made for hire, a category with specific legal requirements, or unless ownership is explicitly transferred in a written agreement. If a client assumes they own everything you create for them and your contract is silent on the issue, a dispute over ownership is expensive for both parties. State clearly who owns the deliverables upon full payment, whether you retain a portfolio license, and whether you have the right to display the work in your own marketing. A limitation of liability clause caps your financial exposure if something goes wrong with your work. Without it, your liability is theoretically unlimited, equal to whatever damages the client can argue your work caused. A standard limitation caps your liability at the total fees paid under the contract. This clause is routinely challenged but routinely upheld in commercial contracts between sophisticated parties. Courts generally enforce liability limitations that are negotiated between businesses, as opposed to the fine print in consumer contracts. Include it. If the client pushes back, negotiate the cap, but don't delete it entirely. The Dispute Resolution Clause determines how disagreements are resolved and by whom. Litigation in court is the default if no clause exists, and it is the most expensive option for both parties. Mediation requires the parties to work with a neutral facilitator, non-binding, relatively fast, and low cost. Arbitration produces a binding decision from a private arbitrator and is typically faster and cheaper than court. Include a governing law provision that specifies which state's laws apply, typically your home state. And include a prevailing party fee-shifting clause. If you win a dispute, the client pays your attorney's fees. This alone deters bad faith non-payment. A termination clause defines what happens when a project ends early, whether initiated by you or the client. Without it, a client can walk away mid-project and you have no clear legal basis for collecting for work completed to date. Include a notice requirement, typically 15 to 30 days written notice, payment for all work completed as of the termination date, and a kill fee provision for projects terminated by the client without cause. A kill fee of 25 to 50% of the remaining contract value is standard in creative industries. It compensates you for reserved time, turned away work, and project ramp-up that cannot be recovered. Use a contract template from a reputable source, not a document you found in a Google search. The Freelancers Union offers a standard contract at freelancersunion.org. AIGA has a standard design contract. Docracy and Bond Terms maintain free, attorney-reviewed templates for various service categories. For contracts above $10,000, have an attorney review your template once, not every contract, just the template, for $300 to $600. That review cost protects you on every future contract you issue using that template. The cost per protected contract amortizes to near zero within a year. A strong contract does not guarantee dispute-free client relationships. It guarantees that if a dispute arises, you have a document that defines what was agreed, protects your payment, limits your liability, and gives you a clear resolution path. Scope, payment terms, IP ownership, liability cap, dispute resolution and termination clause, 6 provisions, 1 document, infinite protection. Part 2 of this series covers the red flags in client contracts, the clauses that cost freelancers money when they sign something the client drafted,